Keith, thanks so much for coming on. I should just say that we worked with each other in the late 80s.
That's right.
Now, fast forward, there's a lot of things that have happened. So thanks for coming back to News 8 and kind of seeing the hallowed halls here that you once worked in. But let's talk about your life. You were a producer, ESPN2, Golf Channel, and we're going to get to that in a second.
Okay.
But let's start with your book called Cover Me Boys, I'm Going In, which you just wrote. And I love the television set that you used on here because it's very retro. Love that. See, right there. You grew up as a kid in the shadow of your dad in Reno.
Yep, I did.
And tell us a story about you and the brothers and building the TV station so that we can set the stage for where you ended up.
Okay, I mean, it was a fascinating and amazing time. My parents, when my dad got out of the Navy, he went and started working for a radio station in Honolulu. He got out of the Navy in Honolulu and was selling advertising time for the television station in Honolulu, or the radio station in Honolulu. And he also is a big sports fan, so the station let him do a little 3-minute sports cast that he called Leander's Sports Slants.
Love the name.
So he would go and interview the coaches and do sports stories and do scores and things and sell the advertising for that. But, you know, I mean, just really loved the business and moved up the kind of the ranks at this radio station in Honolulu, which was owned by a gentleman named Don Reynolds, who also owned other properties around the country. And one of the properties was one of the affiliates in Reno, Nevada, Channel 8. It was KOLO.
How apropos.
Channel 8 in Reno. So after a time, we were there a couple of years. I was born in 1955. My older brother was born 2 years before that in 53. So we were there for my folks were there for about 5 or 6 years. When I was 2, Don Reynolds offered my dad the job as general manager of the TV station in Reno. So we all, my mom, my dad, my older brother and I, packed up and moved to the mainland, and my dad started working as the general manager of the TV station in Reno. And at the time in Reno, one of the smaller markets in the country, it was just when ABC was just starting. So ABC was relatively young, and there was no ABC affiliate in Reno at the time.
And
there
so
were 2.
what did he do? And this is very interesting.
Yeah, so what he did was, after a time, he felt like, because there was a Channel 4 and Channel 8 and the PBS station. There were 3 stations in Reno. So my dad, after a few years, decided that the time was right for Reno to get a 3rd affiliate television station and fly the flag of ABC and carry ABC's programming, because at the time ABC shared. Channel 8 would run some of ABC shows,
Sure.
Channel 4 would run some of ABC shows, but it never had a home in Reno. So my dad got a group of investors together. We were, I mean, for folks in, you know, the early 60s, early to mid 60s, we were living a pretty good life. You know, my dad drove a really nice car, as did my mom. We lived in a big house, and, you know, life was great for me.
And then you cut back.
And then my dad, they basically took everything they owned, had every cent they ever saved or had in the bank, sold the house, sold the cars, got enough money together and got a group of investors together and started this ABC affiliate in Reno. So we went from a great life, and we still had a great life, but all of a sudden we were, you know, kind of renting apartments around town, and we had 2 nice cars, and then we had an Edsel station wagon. But, you know, when you're a kid and you're 6 or 8 or, you know, years old, you don't care. You know, my parents did a wonderful job of making sure that, you know, we never knew.
So suffice it to say, you and the 2 brothers were just TV babies. I mean, you were born into this. You worked at the TV station. Mm-hmm. So everything about you was TV, TV, TV. Okay,
right.
We're going to fast forward a little bit. When did you get your first real TV job as, let's say, a young adult?
Well, you know, my first real TV job was when I was 18 years old. At my dad's station, and what I had done was a
little nepotism there.
A lot of nepotism there,
Sure.
which, you know, was good and bad. I mean, it was nice because I had the opportunity. It was hard because you know, you had to kind of work that much harder to make sure that people didn't think the only reason you were there was because your dad owned the station.
Right.
But luckily for me, and again, there's so much that's happened in my life that is, you know, the planets aligning, both good and bad, that there was a gentleman there, the only sports director that the station had ever had since its inception, was suddenly getting very tired of doing every newscast, working, the 6 o'clock show and the 11 o'clock show and the weekend shows, and he was looking for some relief. And I had come back from school. I went to school for a couple of years up in Oregon.
Like, hello.
And he was at a game, and I was there with some buddies, and he's there, and I went down to say hello. And he said, man, I'd rather be anywhere else than here right now. And I said, well, why don't you give me the camera? I'll shoot the highlights and drop the film off. It was film then. And I'll drop the film off at the station, and you go have a couple of beers, and don't worry, I'll take care of everything. And so that wasn't a job. I did that. I kept doing that for him. And then finally, the news director called me into his office one day, called me up and said, we'd like to offer you the 11 o'clock sports job. Would you be interested in doing that? So,
and the rest, as they say, is history. So you toil around there. You end up in Connecticut at one point. You directed me, we should say, at one point.
I did. In
the late 80s. And then you left and went away and did lots of stuff. How did you find yourself, which will get to this book, and we should say you chronicle your whole TV life in here, which was to me very romantic, as we're about the same age, and I read about the TV station starting and how you develop film and all of that stuff, so that's great. But you end up on the ground floor of ESPN2 and the Golf Channel. So let's talk about how you get to these places and then some of the stories that come out of that.
Okay. Those are long stories.
I'm trying to condense it.
Okay. Well, here, I just want to say my time here was amazing. I mean, this place was...
We paid you to say that.
No, not at all. And this place, it was my first experience outside of Reno. So when I was in Reno, it was home. I grew up there.
Sure.
When I worked at the station, it was with people that I had grown up with, because they were all part, I was going to the station since I was a little kid when, I was on air, I was off air. I did PM Magazine for a few years as the male host, and it was just this nice, real safe spot. And then all of a sudden, I applied for a job and thought I had gotten a job at ESPN as a director. I quit my job in Reno, spent a couple of weeks in Phoenix with a friend who had worked in Reno and was now working in Phoenix, and got back. When I got back to Reno, I called John Kaczynski, who was the guy who hired me at ESPN, and was promptly told that John Kaczynski had been relieved of his duties at ESPN and no longer worked there, and they didn't know who I was or why I was calling.
Right.
So all of a sudden I had quit my job in Reno. I didn't have that job anymore. Now all of a sudden I didn't have a job at ESPN either. They put me in touch with the person who took John's place. He said, we're going to have to start this process all over. Send me your tape. You know how that goes. Who knows if they're going to like it.
Hurry up and wait. Right.
So eventually they said, we can't offer you this job. But if you were closer to us here in Bristol, it might be easier. And the guy that we're hiring for this position, we're taking from one of the stations in New Haven. So I can put you in touch with the folks at the station in New Haven, and maybe you can get that director's job, and then it could lead to a job here. So I was like, great, I'll take it. And so I called the folks here. They were kind enough to think my tape was good enough to hire me, so I came here. And again, I was now all of a sudden classic fish out of water. I mean, I'm here from Reno, and all of a sudden now I'm in Connecticut, where I got here, and I tell this story in the book, but it's freezing here, by the way, the middle of winter.
That happens in New England.
I know, it happens in Reno too, but not quite as cold, that bitter off the water cold.
Yep.
And all I had to keep me warm was my San Francisco 49ers jacket, which, as you can imagine, in this community went over like a lead balloon. Yeah. So that, I had to get a new coat. But again, my time here was amazing. I learned so much here because it was just, this was a big jump for me. This was a big market. I mean, Reno's like 109 or something in the market. And you're in the 20s, and folks in New York are watching, and everybody, this was a big jump for me. So anyway, I know I didn't answer your question, and I rambled on, and you're supposed to condense it. So I get here. Yeah. And I continue to do, the newscasts, and after a pretty rocky start, I settle in and, get going and having a good time, and, but that was, after a few years, I kind of got restless and decided that I had directed newscasts in Reno. I'd come here, I was directing newscasts, and I thought, I'm not loving this. Like, I need
Gotta
to
be
love
something
it,
else
you know?
now.
And
Yeah.
I want to stay in TV, and I really love live sports, specifically golf. Since that time, my parents had sold the station in Reno, semi-retired over in the islands in Hawaii. We're living most of the year in Maui. And when the ESPN golf crews would come to do the PGA Tour and Senior Tour tournaments on Maui, my parents would volunteer. So they got in tight with the production crew and the announcers for ESPN. And I was talking to my dad one night and said, I'm really not happy, and you know, I'd really love to get back into sports. And he said, well, let me make a call, talk to the guys
old TV
over
guy
at ES.
again,
My dad,
right?
again, my dad, you know, with his connections and being my dad, and spoke to the gentleman who was the producer for ESPN Golf, who told my dad to tell me that as soon as I got to LA, I'd have a job. So again, there's the cliff, and here I go taking a leap of faith. And I quit the job here and packed up the car and drove across the country to Los Angeles, and for about a year and a half couldn't get an interview with the guy who said that as soon as I got to LA that there would be a job waiting for me. Who's a wonderful guy, and it ended up all working out. But I got there, ended up doing some other jobs, working at the Disney-owned station in Los Angeles for a time, but every couple of weeks calling Ohlmeyer,
Trying to
seeing
get
if I
in
could
too,
get in,
yeah.
seeing if I could talk to Paul Spengler, seeing if I could talk to anybody. Was on a game show in the meantime.
You've done it all.
I did, you know, it was
and it's
amazing.
all in the book. So get me to ESPN
Okay.
too.
So I got the job with Don Ohlmeyer's communication company, who produced all of the golf for ESPN. So I worked for them. That was in 1990. I worked for them all the way up until the beginning of 1994. And what happened in 1994 was I was suddenly living in Los Angeles with a wife and two very young children, and couldn't really afford to live there anymore on what I was making for Don. And Don had sold his production company to ESPN, so we were all employees of ESPN. Howard Katz was Don's right-hand man and the
Sure.
president of OCC, and he had since, toward the end of '93, had moved to Bristol to become management at ESPN. So I went to the folks at Ohlmeyer and said, I really kind of need to have more money. And they said, well, we can't give you more money, but how would you feel about moving to Bristol, Connecticut and working at ESPN? They just started in the fall of '93, ESPN2. So they said, we have this whole brand new network. We need creative people. Would you consider coming and being one of our producers for ESPN2?
So here you go back to Connecticut again.
So all of a sudden, I'm an employee of ESPN, and I'm now in Connecticut, which was great. And that was the beginning of 1994.
So you saw a lot of stories are in here about ESPN, about ESPN2, about the golf channels. Eventually, you write this book, and you tell a lot of stories, and you get yourself into some trouble.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that, shall we? And,
Sure.
And you're no longer there.
No, I'm not.
So you wrote some stories, and which ones do you think got you in the most trouble?
Well, you know, it was funny because when I was writing the book, the actual copy that got published was about
Self-published book.
rewrite number 6. And throughout the process, I was one of the first 40 people hired at the Golf Channel. So I was at ESPN2 in the beginning of '94, and there were these rumblings about this all golf network that was starting up, and that there was going to be this.
And who thought
this
that would
cable,
work?
Right, and nobody thought it would
Right.
work, but I was sitting there going, my God, that's my dream job. I would love to, produce golf, go back to doing that, and so ended up getting a job with Golf Channel in October of '94. So I was only at ESPN proper for about 10 months, 9.5 months, which didn't go over big either. But so I was on the ground floor of the Golf Channel, and a lot of those stories are in the book. And as I was writing, I had seen Joe Gibbs, who was a beautiful man, a wonderful man, and his team. He's not the race car driver or football coach, Joe Gibbs, but he was an Alabama businessman who had this idea of an all-golf network. Became friends with Arnold Palmer. Arnold Palmer convinced the PGA Tour to get on board to be helpful as opposed to unhelpful with the establishment of the Golf Channel. So I lived through 10 years of Joe running the Golf Channel as a mom and pop company.
Sure.
You know, everybody was, it was open door policy, it was, you know, it was just really, really cool. I mean, it was a wonderful place to be. And obviously, Joe had built that from something that nobody thought would work into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise that everybody wanted. So Joe had suitors. And one of the suitors that he eventually chose to be the company to take his baby into adulthood was Comcast. So Comcast bought the Golf Channel, and the transition from Joe in Comcast, it took about 4, almost 5 years, and it went from a mom and pop shop to a corporate entity, you know, to another arm of a big, huge, you know, corporation.
It didn't settle well for a lot of folks.
It didn't settle well for a lot of folks, and a lot of folks from Philadelphia came down to start to take over management roles at Golf Channel, and there was this huge kind of attitude divide where you could tell the folks coming in from Philly, a lot of them were great folks and really talented people, but some of the management folks were like, okay, this group, this is Golf Channel people. We need not to have them around anymore because we're bringing in this new attitude.
You're the old guard.
You're the bad apples because all you're going to do is talk about how great the olden days were and how great it was back in the old days. And so they kind of systematically eliminated people, positions.
They blew the place up.
Blew the place up. And one of the guys who was, you know, kind of my boss told me that that was his job. His job was to come down and blow the place up. So, and sadly for me, I was one of the folks that got blown up.
And let's say you don't keep your mouth shut in a lot of instances, correct?
Well, you know, I have opinions, and,
yeah, and
I'd like to state them. Yeah.
So the place gets blown up. What happens to you?
I don't get fired, but my role gets diminished a great deal. I mean, I went from producing, in the beginning, producing every single tournament that aired on the Golf Channel for about 10 years. Around the world, around the country, PGA Tour, LPGA Tour, you name it. If it was on the Golf Channel, I produced it.
Yeah.
Then we got so big that we were doing, in the beginnings, anywhere between 23 to 33 tournaments a year. So that, as the Golf Channel got bigger and bigger, that became 38 tournaments and 40 tournaments and 60 tournaments. And so some obviously on the same week. There would be an LPGA event and a PGA Tour event the same week. Well, one guy couldn't do it. So we had to start building other teams of producers and directors and technicians and things like that. So one of the guys, so this guy, the boss man from Comcast, basically told me that I would go from being one of the top producers to, you go and you produce 14, 15, you know, at the time it was the Nationwide Tour, which is the feeder tour for the PGA Tour. He said, you're going to be my Nationwide Tour guy. I'm going to give, you know, this other guy all the PGA Tour events. I'm going to give one of the producers that I had trained, she's going to do the LPGA events.
You swallow hard and then what happens?
You know, and it was funny because I went into I'd set up this meeting, like, you know, Tom was his name, and he said, you know, yeah, come down, we'll have a chat. And I was, you know, working about, here are my goals, and here's where I think we can take the network.
In the pocket, right?
I had my notebook in my backpack, and I was all ready. I was going to make my pitch to how we were going to make this better. And, you know, the first thing he said to me was, don't take this personally. And at that point, I knew that I better just keep my mouth shut and swallow hard and listen to what he had to say. And, you know, one of the things about my wife, Sarah, was that, you know, she was like drummed it into me because there were people along the way that said, you know, your style is pretty much ready, fire, aim. Like you say what's on your mind or you do things and it might be the right thing, but it might be the wrong thing, but you don't ever stop to ask. So maybe you should, and my wife said, just go down there and how about doing more listening than talking this time? And don't say anything, no matter what he says to you. Don't react. You know, so I did that. He told me I was being demoted and I was going to go from doing 30 events to doing 14 events. And, oh, by the way, you're not going to be a staff employee anymore. You're not going to have benefits. You're not going to have
Was he hoping you just
all
quit?
Those things. I think so.
Yeah, makes it easier
I think so. And all I said was, thanks, great. You know, I just want to be a part of the team and whatever I can do, you know, I'm happy to do. And got up and walked out of his office and, you know, broke things and threw things as soon as I got home and wrote some things down. And
At this point, are you writing this book? You're not right, because this took four years to write.
Yeah, about 4.5
So
years.
this didn't come then, but it came shortly thereafter.
It came, the genesis behind this was, again, my wife, who, we lost my dad in 2006 and my mom a year later. And we were over on Maui in their place and just doing what you do when you lose your parents and just getting everything in order. And we came across a box, and in this box were newspaper clippings and manifestos from naval ships that my grandparents had sailed on, and awards that my dad had won, and stories about things that my dad had done, and pictures of him from his time in the Navy. And you know, Sarah, we were just going through this, and Sarah was saying, I had no idea that your dad was such an accomplished guy. She said, this is amazing. And she looked at me and she said, don't let this be your kids. She said, you have done so many things. You've been around the greatest athletes in the world. You've helped start 2 television networks. You've done so many things. You've been all over the world. Don't let your kids be looking in a box when you're gone and going, we had no idea Dad did all this stuff.
So
she
here
said,
it is.
start writing it down. And she just said, make a journal. Just start your memories and start writing things down for them. And I started doing that. And all of a sudden, like one story led into another, and I thought, maybe I could make this a book.
So you end the book. You're no longer working
Now,
at the
that's
Golf
right.
Channel.
I was while I was writing it. I was still working
came
there.
out. Something else happened about the same time,
Right.
and they said goodbye to you. So how did the whole thing come together?
Well, while I was writing this book, the whole time, I was also, Sarah, my wife, was making her way through her career, and that led us from North Carolina, where she was in sports marketing, to working for Casey Wasserman Media Group out in Los Angeles, one of the biggest sports marketing companies in the world. And she was there, and in about the middle of 2010, she got a call from a headhunter that the United States Golf Association was looking for a manager of business affairs. So would be one of the 5 most powerful people at the United States Golf Association.
You can see where this is going.
Right, so she says, well, she hadn't worked in the golf industry. She'd been around golf because of me and liked golf, but, she was more a marketer and more kind of quite a bit more of a thinking person than me. And so she came home and she said, you're not going to believe what happened. I got a call from a headhunter saying that the United States Golf Association wants to interview me. And I said, why would you want to go work for them? It's like a stuffy, all-male,
That's why she went.
And she looked at me and she goes, that's why.
Absolutely.
She said, they want to affect change in that organization, and they think I'm the person to help them do that. And I said, then let's go. Because for me, I was still at the Golf Channel, but I had lost my full-time status, no longer needed to live in Orlando, which that ship sailed a while ago. So as long as I could be fairly near an airport, I could still go produce my events.
So I'm going to get you to this. She negotiates a deal.
Right.
You write this book. Let's get to that.
So I've written the book. The book has gone through all of its rewrites. All the people, the person that I trusted most to read it while I was writing it had told me everything that was wrong with it, told me all the times that I was bitter and angry and had to rewrite it, and you can't say this, and you can't include emails from this president of Comcast in a book when you're basically saying that they made a bonehead move.
Which is what you did do.
So I left the emails out, but I told the story about them being boneheads. But anyway, so Sarah negotiates a deal with the USGA because their broadcast rights were coming up. So they had been with NBC for 20 years. NBC had aired all of the USGA's championships for 20 years. And now there were new negotiations going on to see who would take over, because those rights were going to end at the end of 2014. So they had to renegotiate the rights. Well, the folks at NBC figured it was a layup, that the USGA would never change broadcasters. They would just, they love us and we do a great job for them and they're not going to do anything. And so there was a 60-day exclusive negotiating window with NBC, which didn't come to play and didn't make a substantial offer. And the day that the 60-day negotiating window ended, Fox, who has long wanted to get into golf, called up the USGA and said, we're interested. So the USGA was like, well, okay. And Sarah did the deal that ended up being a $1.2 billion deal for the United States Golf Association, which, as you can imagine, made the folks at Fox very, very happy, because all of a sudden, starting in 2015, they're going to televise the U.S. Open. But it made the folks at NBC bitter and angry and not very nice.
And then your book,
So then
your
I
wife,
published,
then
2
you
weeks
published
later,
this
the book comes out.
Right, with all the stuff in
With
it.
all the stuff in it, some nice, some not so nice, all of it true. And I was still scheduled to produce 4 more events for Golf Channel this year when the book came out. And the vice president of production called me up and said, "You're not," she said, "I'm going to take you off of the first 2 of the 4 that you were supposed to do." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, because of the book." She said, "Because there are a lot of hurt feelings down here because of what you wrote in the book." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Have you read it?" And she said, "No, but I'm not going to get into that argument with you."
What's the one thing that you wrote in here that got you fired, do you think?
I thought that the one thing I wrote, there's one guy who works for the Golf Channel who I call out and kind of expose some true colors. But there's a story of what happened in Hawaii with Kelly Tillman and the Tiger Woods, and I don't know if your viewers know golf, or know this story, but she suggested on air one day that PGA Tour players lynched Tiger Woods in a back alley. That was the way that they could help, more easily compete with him. Well,
Wrong words.
Wrong words. We didn't hear it in the truck at the time. I heard it the next day when I was reviewing the tapes of the earlier days broadcasts. I thought the Golf Channel should ask Kelly to apologize immediately on that next day's show. Golf Channel, after some getting their heads together, Golf Channel management and Comcast management decided they wouldn't do a thing, hoping that it would blow over. Well, 2 days later, it hadn't blown over. In fact, it had gotten huge, had become a huge story in golf. Then Kelly issued not an on-air apology, but about a 15-second apology in the middle of, in an early part of the broadcast. So I tell that story about all of what happened and the conversations about what happened with, and I thought that was kind of the straw.
That was insider information.
Insider information that, basically saying that maybe the management at the time didn't act, responsibly enough. But then I found out later that it was something else, which
they didn't love the deal that your wife
blows my
did.
mind.
Yeah.
Ultimately, they were still smarting from the fact that they had lost the rights to the United States Golf Association. They were really mad at my wife for doing that deal. This book, no matter what was in it, was a good enough reason for them to tell me, you don't need to work for us anymore.
I got to say it's a good read. You're unemployed now. You got this book out. Your wife is employed.
Mm-hmm.
You're at a crossroads. You're a guy that doesn't keep his mouth shut. Where do you go from here?
Well, I hope there's still some producing in me. I'm not done there.
You going to Fox?
I would love to. I would love to. I had a couple of conversations with those guys. They've hired a lead producer for their golf events, who's a great guy, a real experienced guy, done major championships. I met with the folks at Fox and told them that, I'm at the point in my career now that it's not about the money, it's not about my ego, it's about doing what I love to do, and I still love to do it. It's after more than 30 years, I never got tired of getting on an airplane and going to a golf tournament. So I told them that if there was a spot for me, no matter what it was on the team, that I'd like to help and I'd like to be a part of it. I've had some offers from some other folks about doing other sports, which I'm considering, and I'm also trying to write another book.
And that's how we're going to end this. You're writing another book that has nothing to do with hurting people's feelings or the Golf Channel or ESPN. It's completely different. And just do a little teaser on that. What is it?
Well, I don't know. It's fiction. So I'm trying to write it. I'll give you the story is about a young lad, actually a slightly older lad, whose father was like a restaurant reviewer, travel review guy, like a Zagat. But
so much softer, Keith.
But so this kid is growing up, that's how he knows his dad. Well, he discovers after his dad dies that up in the attic are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of National Geographic and Life magazines, and the father had never really gone to any of the places that he rated. He had just read about them and then wrote reviews.
Interesting. Don't say any more, someone
Okay.
will steal your idea. All right, Keith Hirshland, Cover Me Boys, I'm Going In. It's an interesting read. Thanks so much for
That was
coming
my
in
pleasure.
and coming back
Thank
home
you.
to Channel 8.
Thank you for having
And
me.
I can't wait to hear where you land.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I'll let you know.
Okay.